Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We're going to do our chapter 6, Strengthening the New Nation. So we've come out of the American Revolution. We are heading into putting together our new nation. This is likely to be long, so grab yourself a drink, some popcorn, and let's get started. Start with our favorite textbook editor.
The American Revolution gained independence for the 13 states, but it did not really create a new nation. In fact, the Declaration of Independence doesn't even mention the word nation. Americans were so concerned about the abuse of power that they had suffered from under Great Britain that they intentionally created a new government that was protective of the 13 American states and their independence from one another. The government created during the American Revolution, called the Confederation Government because of the Articles of Confederation that outlined its provisions, did not have a president, did not have a chief executive, did not have a judiciary, didn't have the power to tax. It depended on the states to voluntarily contribute funds for the operation of the national government. As a result of those weaknesses, in 1787, the individual states agreed at long last that they needed a new constitution and a more powerful national government.
All right. So, you have the Articles of Confederation that were put together, and I think we've said this before, but there's a very weak organization. Once they're ratified, they immediately go into effect. And this does occur during the American Revolution. Under the Articles, there's no executive branch of the government to oversee the coordination of the laws Congress pass. That was Congress's job. It was felt that having an executive branch was too much like having a king, and that was something the framers of the Articles, can't even read today, the framers of the Articles wished to avoid. They're trying to do things as opposite as possible at this point. They feel like they've been burned and they don't want to go back to what they had. One of the biggest problems, though, is it doesn't have the power to tax. The Articles don't. The Congress doesn't. It has to ask the states to give them money, and the states didn't have to pay. As a result, Congress has to look elsewhere to get the money to pay off its debts. So we all know that that's probably not going to be super successful. All right. So since they can't tax, the national government turns to the one source of income that seems inexhaustible: the land between the Mississippi River and the western boundaries of the original colonies. So how do we get more money? We sell land. So previous laws passed by Congress had stated that these lands would not be made into colonies, but would be allowed to enter the Union as full states. The Northwest Ordinance was the first major allotment of land to be opened for the settlement, with the premise that once settlers comprised a certain number, they would be allowed to enter the Union as a state. One major proviso or condition of this ordinance was that the slavery was not allowed. So they are starting to cut back on slavery at this point and really making it a point to say it's allowed, it's not allowed kind of thing. All right, the new nation has to develop diplomatic corps and dispatch it to other nations to try and secure new treaties for economic and political alliances. Although you do have the Treaty of Paris 1783 that ends the American War for Independence, it stipulates that Britain must leave the Northwest Territory. It retains a string of forts in the area, so it does not exactly leave, and this is going to lead up to some problems later. When confronted with this problem, England countered that the former colonies had not paid their debts, as also required in the treaty, because they don't have any money and they can't tax. With Spain, the subject was the southern border, in which both Spain and the United States held a claim. Spain held Florida and an area stretching from it to Louisiana. The Treaty of Paris decreed that American citizens were allowed to ship goods down the Mississippi, but in 1784, the Spanish governor of Louisiana closed the port of New Orleans, where the goods shipped south would be reloaded on seaworthy ships to the United States. So Spain's not playing real nice right now either. So Great Britain's keeping its fort, saying we owe money. Spain is closing down ports and not allowing us to trade. All right. So during the American Revolution, the framers, who at the time primarily farmed... Oh, no, I'm sorry. I can't read. This word says farmers, not framers. So the farmers, who at the time primarily farmed enough to keep themselves and their families fed, were not bothered much. In some areas, the British Army would free slaves to use them as servants for themselves. So I don't know that that really means they're free. During the war, Great Britain had the largest navy in the world, and as colonies had relied on the assistance of the navy before independence, those colonies whose economies revolved around trade were not happy when that protection was no longer provided. As a result, trade was substantially harmed. After the war, Great Britain is going to forbid the United States to trade with the West Indies because they own the West Indies, which had to import most of its food. I don't know if you recall when we talked in Chapter 5, all the trade that was going on in the West Indies. Maybe that was... Anyway, it's the South Atlantic system going on, moving forward. I can't remember if we talked about that or not, but either way, we were trading a lot of things with the West Indies, and now Great Britain is going to cut that off. All right, this word says the framers. The framers of the Articles, they wanted a loose organization of states with more power than the central government. While this may have been a good idea when it was initially put together, it was not long in practice that severe problems emerged. Congress could not stop one state from raising taxes on imports while another one lowered them to persuade new customers to their markets. So Congress has no control. Which in theory to them sounded good because they didn't want an overbearing leader like they've had with Great Britain. But everything needs a leader. Every organization, every group needs a leader. So we have these problems with the states. You've got these other problems with money. Congress can't stop the states from printing money to pay their debts. And hopefully we all know just because you print money doesn't mean you have more money. Many states print it freely with nothing of value backing the money. So these decisions lead to inflation and they make the paper money worthless. Excuse me. Sorry. All right. This is a cabinet maker. People like him favored tariffs on foreign goods. That meant that they could sell their own goods at a cheaper price. So taxing imports was good for people who made things. All right, so Massachusetts does not fall victim to the desire to print substantial amounts of money, while at the same time it has high property and poll taxes. The taxes that allow people to vote, that's what a poll tax is. Those are illegal now. As a result, farmers led by Daniel Shays held courthouses in Massachusetts hostage to prevent the courts from foreclosing on their lands due to lack of paper currency. Men were sent in to put down the rebellion. 4 farmers were killed. Many have linked the rebellion to the death knell of the Articles of Confederation. The federal government needed to be stronger to prevent similar situations from occurring across the United States. I think even if that hadn't happened, the Articles would have fallen eventually, because that's not a good way to run a government. Everybody gets to decide what they want to do. Just think about it in your family. If you were all equals. And everybody just did what they wanted to do, and there was no voice in it, but you're still trying to function as one group. It doesn't really work. Everybody has different opinions and different desires and stuff, so there has to be something that's going to combine all the ideas together. So this is going to be a depiction of Shays and his followers. They want a more flexible monetary policy and the right to postpone paying taxes until the post-war agricultural depression lifts. All right. So, like I said, Articles of Confederation just weren't really good for what we needed at the time. So by 1785, people do realize that they need to be strengthened. But there's a big stumbling block. You have to have unanimous support, and not everybody was on board with the new Constitution. You have meetings at Washington's home at Mount Vernon and the Annapolis Convention. Delegates met to discuss the future of the nation. Although the Annapolis Convention was a failure, Alexander Hamilton secured from the delegation a resolution calling for a constitutional convention to strengthen the federal government, but not the Articles of the United States. So they aren't necessarily trying to improve the Articles of Confederation. They're trying to strengthen the national government, which is going to call for a new document. Okay. So we put together our Constitutional Convention. The delegates that are there represent the broad spectrum of the United States citizens. You have lawyers, you have farmers, you have college graduates, you have merchants. Each had a belief that there was at least one area in which the Articles could do a better job. It was not long before these delegates were divided into two camps, one for the big states, such as Virginia, New York, and Pennsylvania, and the other for the small states, such as Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Delaware. Both sides are going to offer plans of what they want to see as a new form of government for their nation. It was clear that you need a compromise that's going to bring the two sides together. So we have the Virginia and the New Jersey plans. Let's see. Okay. This is Madison. He was only 36 when he assumed a major role in drafting the Constitution. And this miniature was done by Charles Wilson Peale in 1783. So a lot of young men, a lot of old men, variety of people. Okay, so the Virginia plan. So this is a plan that is going to have a unicameral legislation. Let me get the details real quick. Hold on. Wait. We're getting there. Okay, so the Virginia plan is going to call for a bicameral legislation, which the number of representatives in each house would depend on the population of the state. So obviously this is why the Virginia plan is going to be favored by the larger states, because with more population you get more representation. The New Jersey plan, on the other hand, is going to call for a unicameral legislation, so one body, in which every state's going to receive one vote. Both do call for national government with three branches. So you've got the executive, judiciary, and legislative branches. So we come up with a great compromise. And it does end the debate between the large states and the small states. So what is the great compromise? So first off, it provides for a bicameral Congress. So we have a House of Representatives where each state is represented according to its population. And we have the Senate, where each state has 2 senators. Both houses of Congress must pass every law. And hopefully you know that is still how things are today. Let's see. As far as the powers in the Constitution, the framers established a clear separation of powers so that one entity in the new government could not be lawmaker, law enforcer, and judge. This, they hoped, would provide a system in which the nation would not be dominated by one branch of government. The president is charged with ensuring that all laws passed by Congress are enforced. He, however, does not have the authority to create the laws on his own. The Constitution creates only one court in the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, and establishes only one member on that court, the Chief Justice. This way, Congress can create as many courts underneath the Supreme Court as it deems necessary, and may place as many judges and justices in these positions as it sees fit. Let's see, examples of countervailing forces are the veto to kill laws, the ability of Congress to overturn a veto, and the power to impeach and remove members of the executive and judicial branches. We call that separation of powers, checks and balances. So everybody has a job. The presidents, the judiciary, the legislative, but everybody can be checked to make sure they are doing their job with checks and balances. All right, so the Constitution was signed September 17th, 1787. This painting is going to show George Washington presiding over what Thomas Jefferson calls an assembly of demigods in Philadelphia. Why would he call it that? Probably because these people were making rules and putting together something that was going to rule an entire nation of people. All right. So now we've written the Constitution, so it has to be voted in. As in what we saw in 1776, the musical, the Declaration of Independence had to be unanimous. So does the Constitution. So the Constitution is submitted to each state to ratify, and you get 2 distinct camps that come out of it. You have the Federalists, which are going to include Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, and they're going to publish our essays arguing for the ratification, and we will look at some of the Federalist essays probably this week. Members of the Anti-Federalists, such as Richard Henry Lee and Patrick Henry, not as well organized in the rebuttals, but they're still widely read. They write their Anti-Federalist papers. So the arguments for ratification include standardized monetary supply, reduction of taxes, and repayment of the war bonds. Arguments against ratification include the fact that there was no Bill of Rights. So again, this was added later, 1791 to be exact. The Constitution provided a similar government system to Great Britain, so similar power struggles might follow, and the ratification process was illegal under the Articles. So they're saying you can't ratify something new with our current form of government. All right, Federalist Papers. Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay published a series of essays in 1788 defending the concept of strong central government and urging ratification of the Constitution. All right. So as far as the states go, the small states don't really have as many opponents to the Constitution as the larger ones. Without New York and Virginia ratifying, the new government would be but a shell. Once they did, it was a fait accompli. The new government was formed and the old was disbanded. New York was chosen as the site for the first capital. So, like I said, the small states adopt it first. The larger states, the anti-federalists, they demand a Bill of Rights. Once that is agreed upon, then they agree to vote for the Constitution. New Hampshire does become the 9th state to ratify. This is when the government is formed. So it does take a while for all of the states to ratify. Delaware is our first state to join the Union under the Constitution. Then we have Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maryland, South Carolina, New Hampshire, Virginia, New York, North Carolina, and Rhode Island, who is one of our biggest holdouts there. 2 years after New York, the 11th state, and 6 months after North Carolina. So it takes a while for them to ratify that. All right. Many newspapers, local newspapers, published the Constitution in 1787. Allows the Americans across the country to read and discuss it. Something we would do today. All right. So in 1789, we have almost 4 million people. We stretch from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, through the eastern seaboard and the mighty Mississippi. The United States was experiencing economic and demographic growth on a large scale. The differences between the agrarian society in the South and the shipping-focused North continue to increase. And these are going to be things that eventually lead to problems. Washington, our new president of the United States, he appreciates the delicate position he's in. For everything that he did would be looked upon by future generations as precedent for further actions. Washington really understood the position he was in, and he understood that whatever he did would set precedents for what was to come. All right, so government structure. So in order to fulfill his role as chief executive, Washington established his cabinet, which is composed of leaders of the executive departments. So in the executive branch, we start out with the Department of State, who's going to be responsible for diplomatic matters of the United States. First Department of State Secretary was Thomas Jefferson. The Department of the Treasury is the chief banker of the United States, initially overseen by Alexander Hamilton. And the Department of Justice was the domain of the Attorney General, Edmund Randolph. The Supreme Court was the only court created by the Constitution, and the only member specifically mentioned was the presiding officer, the Chief Justice. Congress was given the authority to create as many levels of jurisdiction of courts and as many justices and judges as was deemed necessary. John Jay was the first Chief Justice. So when you wonder why, or if you, maybe you're not wondering, who knows, but anyway, you should be. When the Justice Scalia passed away this summer, they have not replaced him. And the reason is, A, Congress is being bratty, but B, there's no requirement as to how many justices there needs to be. We have traditionally had 9, and we will likely, once the new president comes in, get a 9th justice. But there's no law that says they need to have 9. It just has been what's been traditional. All right. So the Bill of Rights. So this was to kind of calm the fears that we were going to have an overbearing national government. They add the Bill of Rights to ensure the rights of the citizens as well as the state in the new government were protected. This is ratified in 1791. So you get the final ratification of the Constitution in May of 1790. So 1791, the Bill of Rights is added. When the Constitution was ratified, the United States was the only nation in the world that did not, in some form, sponsor a set religion or mandate some form of religious requirement to hold office. Interesting, huh? In the First Amendment, Congress was forbidden from endorsing a religion or in preventing others from worshiping as they saw fit. So separation of state and church. All right, so now we have to raise money. The only method that Congress had of raising money originally was by placing taxes on imports. So this is known as a tariff. Tariff is another word for taxing. Taxing of an individual's income does not come until the 20th century in the form of the 16th Amendment. That occurs during the Progressive Era. So Hamilton was a man who had pulled himself up by the bootstraps and was a firm believer in a national economic policy that would strengthen the role of the central government while at the same time enriching the national economy. Ooh, and I can't wait to see Hamilton the musical. It's not going to be here till next year, but I'm pretty excited. As Secretary of the Treasury, Hamilton wins approval to absorb all the state's individual wartime debt, along with that of the national government, so that by paying them all off as one debt, the establishment of a national bank, along the lines of the Bank of England, would bolster the economy of the United States and provide for an excellent credit rating for the new nation. Yeah, that would be good. The downside of Hamilton's plan is that it's going to strengthen the hand of the northern shippers and merchants in the government over that of the agrarian South. His plan would be the first to illustrate the sectional differences in the nation between North and South. Hopefully we know what we're leading up to here. Having won the debt payment debate, Hamilton would move to his vision of a national bank to control the monetary supply. His vision was a centralized banking authority that would allow the government to prevent the inflation or deflation of the dollar. However, the power to create a bank was not specifically mentioned in the Constitution, and the debate that emerged was the first great debate on constitutional interpretation to be heard in Congress. In the end, the bank was approved. All right, this is our friend Alexander Hamilton. He was Secretary of the Treasury from 1789 to 1795, the duration of Washington's presidency. All right, so as part of the mercantilist system of Great Britain, the American colonies had been forbidden from developing a manufacturing base. Once the symbiotic relationship was severed, it was imperative the United States develop such a base in order to survive. So if you remember your question, it asked about the Industrial Revolution in England, but it does not occur in the States till many, 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 many moons later. So this is one of the things that's going to start to lead to it. So in order to encourage the growth, the price of items being imported that had a local competitor had to be kept higher, so that the local market could grow until they were able to stand on their own. So Hamilton won the creation of protective tariffs to do this. So we're just charging higher taxes on things we're producing ourselves. Thanks to Hamilton's vision and drive, the war debts were paid off, a manufacturing base was burgeoning, and once again, foreign credit began to flood the American markets. It's probably our only time ever not to have a debt. I'm just kidding. Sort of. Okay, so this is where we get the beginnings of political parties. So we know today we have the Democrats and the Republicans, and we're going to closely watch this race and see who comes out on top. Should be interesting. But anyway, today we have the Republicans and the Democrats. They have not always been the two political parties that have been in control. Let's see. So as far as how this gets started, although Hamilton's plan was successful, many people thought that it was very heavy-handed, and so they viewed these actions as unconstitutional. And this is what's going to lead to the creation of the first political parties. So Hamilton and his followers create the Federalist Party, which is going to promote a strong central government. Jefferson and Madison, who opposed Hamilton's views, created the Republicans, or Democratic Republicans Party. They stood for the rights of the state and a strict reading of the Constitution. So this is where we start getting political parties. But you can see they're all working in the same government. They're different political parties. So you probably wouldn't find that as much today as far as the cabinet members go. All right, this is going to be Thomas Jefferson. This is also painted by Charles Willson Peale, 1791. Okay. So the American Revolution actually is strongly believed to have led to the French Revolution. The French supported us in our revolution, and they kind of saw, people started to kind of see, well, things don't have to be the way that they always were. And so they kind of have their own revolution. Originally, we kind of think it's similar to our own in 1776. But in 1792, France declares war on Prussia and Austria and begin to slaughter their nobility. So obviously this is going to cause problems in the United States because we have the Treaty of Alliance with France, signed in 1778, that states these two countries were perpetual allies and were obligated to defend each other. So Washington in 1793 puts together his proclamation, says that the United States is neutral in the European wars and that any citizen caught aiding in these wars would be prosecuted. So French aren't going to be real happy with that. So the French diplomat to the United States during the early days of the French Revolution was citizen Edmond Guénet. Guénet had begun hiring privateers to attack Spanish Florida and harass British ships. Washington worried that Guénet's actions would lead to America's entrance into the war against England, which he does not want, and he demands Guénet's recall. By the time the demand reaches France, another revolution had swept out Guénet's supporters, and his arrest was ordered. Guénet begged for asylum to prevent being returned. In an effort to soothe relations with Great Britain, while at the same time securing promises to pull British forces out of the Ohio River Valley, John Jay was sent to England. His negotiations secured very few of the demands of Congress, and his treaty, though offensive to many, was ratified to avoid embarrassment abroad. Yeah. Not our best foreign policy going on here. Washington's going to send General Mad Anthony Wayne into the Northwest Territory in 1793 to protect settlers from Native Americans. You have the Battle of Fallen Timbers. Wayne's soldiers inflict heavy casualties on the Native American warriors, burn their villages, and the Indians have no other choice but to surrender their land in the Treaty of Greenville, and move west. Our regressions begin. Not good. Alright, so he's levied a tax against whiskey in 1791, which has angered the farmers. That is their principal crop. At the time, it is easier to move jugs of whiskey across the Appalachian Mountains than it was to move sheaves of wheat. The farmers feared that this was another attempt to fleece the poor to subsidize the rich. Events erupted in 1794 in western Pennsylvania, where federal revenue officers were being terrorized. Washington calls out the militia, but by the time they get there, the rebels had vanished. A few were captured and marched in irons through Philadelphia, but the rebellion had ended. Excuse me. In Pinckney's Treaty of 1795, Thomas Pinckney secures the use of New Orleans, the land north of the 31st parallel to the Tennessee River and west of the Mississippi. There's a lot going on in our new government. This is Washington in 1794. He reviews the troops that are mobilized to quell the Whiskey Rebellion. Alright. So, land in 1795. You have the Land Act of 1796, Congress extends the rectangular surveys of land that had been accepted in 1785. Agreed to sell the land at $2 per acre, with 640 acres being the minimum sold. This is well beyond the means of most farmers, and it's not until 1800, when it was revised to 320 acres minimum, any down payment was allowed, that it becomes affordable. 1795, we have Daniel Boone expands a Native American trail between the Appalachian Mountains, known as the Cumberland Gap, and opened what has since become the Wilderness Road. This allows for easier access to the backcountry and for the flow of goods and settlers into the area east of the mountain range. So much changing. So this is our friend Daniel Boone. Kind of helping out the settlers. Alright, so we cover a lot of time in this chapter. And we are all the way to the end of Washington's presidential term. He served 2 terms. He was asked to serve a 3rd. Washington felt that wasn't a good precedent to set, and that 2 terms was plenty for anybody. He is ready to retire. He writes a farewell address to the nation, and he calls for American citizens to forego political parties as well as to avoid entangling alliances with foreign nations. We listened to neither. We probably should have, but we did not listen to him at all. In all 3 elections prior to 1804 for president, the candidate with the 2nd highest number of votes would become the vice president. So after the 1800 election, this was discontinued. So in the 1796 election, John Adams would win the presidency. Tom Jefferson would become the vice president, even though they were of different political parties and had different beliefs. Can you imagine today? So if Hillary Clinton wins and Donald Trump is her vice president, or vice versa, woo, that would be some kind of craziness. All right. So by the time Adams comes into office, the United States is in undeclared war with France. You have over 300 American ships have been plundered by French ships, and the United States has broken off diplomatic relations with its former ally. In an effort to prevent a declared war, Adams sends a delegation to France to seek a diplomatic end. Before the delegation was allowed to meet with their French counterparts, 3 French officials, whom Adams would name X, Y, and Z in his report to Congress, demanded a bribe before they would gain an audience. When this became known in the United States, it was greeted with a cry of war with France. French officials realizing their mistake, they apologized. Okay, we are finally getting close to the end. This is our friend John Adams. He was the first president to take up residence in the White House in early 1801. So we move our capital from New York City to Washington. This is a cartoon indicating the anti-French sentiment generated by the XYZ affair. You have the 3 American negotiators that reject Paris Monster's demand for money. All right. Whew. Getting there. So the counterattack was conceived of as Republican attempts to undermine his presidency. John Adams signs the following act, and he commits the greatest mistake of his presidency, and thereby doing so his chances for re-election. So we have the Naturalization Act, which is going to change the time period necessary to become a citizen from 5 to 14 years of residency. The Alien Act, which is going to empower the presidency with the ability to deport dangerous aliens. The Alien Enemies Act was designed to expel from America enemy aliens at will during the time of war. And the Sedition Act, which forbids writing, publishing, or speaking ill of the government or its officers. Yeah, none of these things would any of us really agree sound like a good idea. But there you are. The election of 1800. No candidate wins a majority in the Electoral College. Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr tie. And in accordance with the Constitution, the election was to be decided by the House of Representatives, which causes Jefferson to win. And I think on that note, we are out. So this is our election of 1800. So you can see Jefferson has 73 electoral votes. Aaron Burr has 73 electoral votes. John Adams, 65, and Charles C. Pinckney, 64. So this is going to be a pivotal election. All right. Well, I think that's all we have for now. That was quite a lot of information. We'll try and break down some of it as we go forward this week, but we're plodding along. We're getting through history. So I will see y'all all soon. Have a good morning, afternoon, or evening.